So welcome to the ICC webinar of today. We are honored to have Richard Lewis to tell you about the cultural triangle. Caroline will introduce him later to you with more information than I could give. May I kindly ask you to switch off your microphones and your camera during the presentation. If you have any questions, in the bottom line of your screen, you have a chat, so you can put your questions into the chat if you want to. Richard will answer questions at the end, so there will be some time spared for questions and answers. And now I would like to ask Caroline to introduce her father to you.
Okay, hello everybody. It's very nice to meet you virtually. I'd like to introduce my father, Richard D. Lewis, who's author of When Cultures Collide, written more than 20 years ago, but now in its 4th edition, in which he developed his own model.
Oh, sorry about this. Here's a second slide. What is culture? Well, we know that it's not always easy to define. It's a very complex thing, and there are many kinds of cultures. This is a definition probably had something to do with Hofstadter in time past. Cultural behavior is the end product of collected wisdom passed down through hundreds of generations, core beliefs, values, notions, and action patterns. Yeah. Well, as we know, culture is not only national, although we usually talk about national culture, but what other kinds of cultures are there? If you live in California, you don't have the same culture that you have in New York. So therefore, regional cultures are very common. Professional, teacher and engineer act very differently culturally. Gender, men and women are not the same. Class, upper class and lower class. Religious is certainly an important factor in culture. Generational, my son is not like me, you know, he's 25 years younger. But in fact, in 25 years' time, he probably will be like me. Ethnic, I'm British, but I'm part Welsh, so that you might be part Jewish, or you might be part Romanian or Hungarian, so that can always be different. Corporate, the culture, the company you work for will certainly, if you work with a company like IBM, it strongly affects the way you think about things. The corporate culture, and of course a combination of all these makes the most important factor of all is the personal culture. So each person is a culture in himself or in herself. How many countries are there in the world? Good question. Well, United Nations membership is 197 countries. How many cultures are there in the world? Not so easy to answer. More than 2,000. Including hundreds of minor ones. There are many in the Amazon basin. There are several hundred in Papua New Guinea, and there are more than 500 cultures among the Australian Aborigines. Well, you're not going to learn all those. How many cultures do you need to study to do business around the world? Well, these are the top 45. You might do business with any of these countries, but to study 45 business styles takes too long. What is the solution? Fortunately, there is a handy solution. All the world's cultures can be neatly classified into 3 categories. These are linear active, multi-active, and reactive. You are probably, almost certainly, one of those yourself. Linear active cultures, a culture whose people are task-oriented, highly organized planners, and they like to do one thing at a time. Nice and calm and organized, German, for instance. Multi-active cultures, let's say the Italians, or the Spaniards, an extrovert, people-oriented culture whose members tend to do many things at once, often in an unplanned order. And reactive cultures, Asians, Japanese, Chinese, respective-oriented culture, whose people are reluctant to start anything, to initiate anything. They prefer to listen first and then answer and react to it afterwards. Here you see some of the characteristics and how they vary. Linear active people talk half the time. Multi-active people, again, Italians, Spaniards, talk most of the time. And the Japanese sitting opposite them listen most of the time. Linear active people do one thing at a time. Multi-active people, several things at once. The reactive people just react to what you do. And then the planning is different. And you notice that the linear active people, of course, are direct, but the multi-active people are emotional, and the reactive people are indirect. Partly concealing feelings, displaying feelings, concealing feelings. So you see, if you read down these lists, you see the characters are quite different, and it's not easy for them to interact with each other, as we shall see. Here we have the distribution. Who are the linear actives? They are the Germans, the British, the North Americans, including Canada, and the Scandinavians. The multi-active people are the Latins, of course, Italians, French, Spanish, and so on, Mediterraneans, but also Arabs, Africans, and Slavs. Doesn't mean their cultures are identical to Latin cultures, but it does mean that they're equally multi-active, equally emotional, and so forth. Other reactive cultures, Japanese and Chinese and Koreans and most Asians, are very similar to each other. And then, of course, some people are a little bit of each. So Indians, because of their geographical location, are partly multi-active, but they're partly reactive. They're Asians after all. And Russians, Finns, and Swedes and Turks all tend to have hybrid tendencies. This is a very interesting diagram. It shows the relative position of many cultures, nearly all the cultures in the world, according to their tendencies to be reactive, multi-active, or reactive. And you may see there's some surprises there. Look at Canada down in the middle at the bottom, not very close to America, because their culture is different. It's more reserved. Therefore, it's on its way to the right-hand side where you have the reactive cultures of Japan and so on. And if you look at down in that line, you see Singapore and Hong Kong are to the left of Japan and China. It's because they were places made to make money. And well, money is a very linear factor. And then we go up the left-hand side, you see the real linear active people are the Germans and the British and the USA. But if you go higher, you see people like the Danes, the Irish and the Australians. They're rather more exciting people, more vocal than the British. And then higher up you go, you get the emotional French and Poles and Russians, and then at the top the Latins, including the South Americans, and who are all the really multi-active people in the world, including the Africans on the other side, quite similar in many of the ways they talk and plan and act. So that's a very interesting diagram, and of course you can study it if you are able to get this material later on. Now, people, of course, are inside the triangle because they are a combination of different characteristics. When we test them by asking them about 50 questions, they find a place in the triangle, depending on their category, whether they're multi-active or reactive or linear active. And after testing, that is how it looks. This, in fact, is an actual diagram of the HR department of the World Bank, which we tested some time ago. And a lot of them are in the middle, which means they are rather good at being mediators because they feel some affinity with each of the three corners. But there are some strange cases. And if you look at the person on the right-hand side, nearest Asian, near Korea, you think, oh, that's an Asian, and he will get on well, you know, to negotiate with the Asians. But in fact, when we checked on this, he was a South American. Now, South Americans who were very multi-active and largely Latins, how could you have the South Americans so near the Asian corner? And you have to think about it. Well, South America is a very varied place, and some countries in South America have tendencies. For instance, this man came from Paraguay. And if you think of Paraguay and Bolivia and Mexico, They came from a certain place, which was not Spain. These people, where did they come from? They came over the Bering Strait 10,000 years ago, and we call them American Indians, or Red Indians sometimes. So this man was actually Paraguayan, and he had the characteristics of the Asian from where they came. And he shows that culture can last 10,000 years. He acted quite differently from Latins in Buenos Aires and other typical Spanish-oriented South American people. Out of the 7 billion people in the world, how many are linear active, multi-active, and reactive? Well, this is the distribution. The majority are multi-active, but another large number, 2 billion, are reactive because of China and Japan, of course. And 700 people only are linear active, which is all the Westerners and most of the Europeans. We are 700 million, quite inferior in number to the others. 300 million people are hybrids, and they make good mediators because they have a little bit of the three categories in them, which enable them to identify with more nationalities than others. Now, what about the values? Because values largely count when it comes to the typology of the culture. The linear active people, imagine Germans and Americans, logic, directness, they're law-abiding, they plan ahead, facts are before things, which is very important. And they believe in scientific truth. You know, 2 + 2 makes 4, that's scientific truth. Logical, direct people. The multi-active people, their chief value is the family. Think of Italians. You ask an Italian, what's your chief value? He'll tell you, my family. Charisma is important, and they are much more flexible when it comes to rules and regulations and situational truth. Very typical in France, they always say, if you ask them a question, they always say, cela dépend, it depends. So truth depends on the situation. Verbosity, they talk a lot. Multi-actives and feelings are before facts, which is the opposite to the linear active people. And then you have these very interesting people in Asia, where face is the most important factor. Tradition is very important, and they are very indirect. So you're never quite sure what they mean when they talk to you. The hierarchy is very important, the group or orientation, and they don't trust people who talk distrust of verbosity. They don't trust like people who talk too much. Maybe I'm talking too much. Okay, you see the difference in values and also the communication styles, which are a very important factor in culture. You see how they vary. One of the most important aspects of culture is communication. And you look at this very quick diagram. At the top, you see the linear active way of communicating, getting to the point from A to B. Multi-active people, they wander around a bit and don't quite go directly to B, but they do get there in the end. But the reactives at the bottom, they circle around B, and they don't like to be too direct with anyone. It might be not quite polite enough. So they very often never even arrive at B. And so it's hard to follow their conversation or their meaning. Let's look at an example of an Italian talking to a Finn. What is the Italian communication style? First of all, it's a verbose approach. They usually explain, let's say they're discussing a joint venture. And the verbose approach will be at least 5,000 words. Now, Finns don't take to 5,000 words very easily, though, because they are very quiet people. And so the Finn is likely to say to the Italian, after some miscomprehension, excuse me, but 5,000 words, it was an awful lot. I'm not quite sure what you mean. Whereupon the Italian then will increase in verbosity, and he'll explain in 10,000 words what he meant by the first 5,000. Of course, by then the Finn is quite under the table. Look at the Finn. How does he or she communicate? With minimal speech. So he would describe the same joint venture approach, or whatever they're discussing. He would describe it in 500 words. And then when the Italian says, "Sorry, you didn't say very much. Can you explain it?" The Finn then does not, like the Italian, use 10,000 words to explain it. The Finn uses 10,000 words in a lifetime. So he will summarize and he will say, what I really meant was, A, B, and C. And the poor Italian is waiting for the rest of the alphabet, and so the communication between Finns and Italians is very bad indeed. And I lived in Finland for a few years and knew the differences and the difficulties that the Italians endured who were dealing with Finns. The linear active communication style is here. It's a direct style. They make a proposal, and the other side makes a proposal B, and you examine the pros and cons, and it's all very direct. And what they're looking for is a compromise. And so they'll make a preliminary decision, summing up, and there will be action. So the linear active communication leads to fairly direct and fairly quick action, because speech is for information. And of course, the more information they have, the more easily they can act. It's a much more slow business with multi-active people to come to a decision, because with multi-active, speech is not for information, it's for expressing opinion. So people like the French and the Italians will digress a lot. They will bring in a lot of different arguments, and they'll look at things from many perspectives, and they try to impose their logic. And of course, they're quite happy to persuade people and to argue, and they love that, which linear active people are not very keen on. And of course, the reactive people are even less keen on persuading and arguing, because they want to be polite. So in reactive communication style, you see that the polite preamble, you decide who is important, who isn't, and then you ask the other side to speak first. And you have a lengthy discussion, and as you see in the diagram down below, although you were opposing early on, you start converging in the discussion and closing, and eventually they merge. So they are quite good at making agreements with people, but it takes a long time. And also they delay the implementation. You can wait 3 months maybe before you take any action. Speech is for creating harmony. Remember, multi-actives for giving opinions, and linear actives for creating information. Individuals in any given category may find that the communication style is somewhat hybrid. So they may have a little bit of one and a little bit of other style, and well, it's okay. What is your own communication pattern like? You can think about it. Now, people talk in different ways and communicate in different ways, and they also listen in different ways. So if we look at one or two listening habits, the linear actives, as you can expect, listen for information, and they expect structures and facts, maybe some humor, and a rather dry and open reaction. This is a very direct listening style. If you look at the multi-actives, they are not so simple. They are rather cynical. They listen in a cynical manner. They expect not so much information, but they expect drama or romance. They accept long-windedness, and of course they can be tactical in the way they react. So they're listening for opinions rather than for information. And then the reactives, they are talking to create harmony, as we said earlier. They tolerate a lot of length, no open disagreement, because, you know, Japanese and Chinese like to be very polite with each other. And nothing is settled now. You know, we discuss it now, but later on we will make the decisions. So it's a very slow process. Now, the Americans, they, of course, are linear actives, but they have one other interesting factor, and that is that the first thing they want is entertainment. So the American listening pattern, the first requirement is entertain me. And if you entertain the American, then they will listen. Maybe you told them a joke, they will listen a good 20 minutes very carefully, because maybe you tell another joke. So that's in the 20-minute period after the entertainment, they very much get down to business and they think very quickly. So this can lead to some interesting situations. For instance, I'll tell you about a joke in Atlantic City. About 20 years ago, I was advising the Dornier company in Germany. And the Dornier company, as you know, used to produce aeroplanes during the war. And now they produce missiles. And they sell these missiles to the Americans. And every year they have a conference on how to promote business and so forth. And one year they asked me to go with them to Atlantic City because they took 18 engineers who were not very good in English. And they were all middle-aged and from Bavaria, most of them. And they said, would you come with us, Mr. Lewis, and help us with the language, which I did. And we arrived in Atlantic City, and we were housed in a big room, a lecture room, and a young man came to address the meeting and to open the meeting. And of course, as an American, he knew what to do. You begin with a joke. So he started the conference by saying, I'm sorry to have organized this conference in Atlantic City. As you know, Atlantic City is a very boring place. It's so boring that when the tide went out on Wednesday night, it didn't come back on Thursday morning. Well, you know, this devastated the Germans. The engineers all turned their heads and looked at me. I tried to look away. I knew what was going to happen. And in the first coffee break, the chief engineer came round and said, Mr. Lewis, what did that man mean when he said the tide did not come back? He said, in Germany, the tide always comes back. Yeah. I said, well, yes, also in America, in fact, also in America, the tide does come back. So he said, well, why did he say that it did not come back? Well, I said, it's American humor. Ah, he said, American humor. So he went back to his group and he said, it was American humor. And then they all laughed and they were happy after that. So you see, different listening patterns can have different effects. Okay, leadership, as you can imagine, is affected by culture. These are the three main leadership styles. Linear actives, they love innovation, it's an open style, and it's a democratic leadership. Whereas the multi-actives, they have autocratic leadership. France, Italy, all these people, the boss is the boss. And they have rather daring suggestions sometimes, and they offer several perspectives. That's the big difference. The linear actives are likely to propose something innovative, maybe one policy. The multi-actives will offer many perspectives, and they want to discuss them all. The reactives, they in leadership, they show a lot of respect to the people below them, and that respect is rewarded by obedience from the people below. And this is the Confucian way of organizing things. Respect is rewarded by obedience. So which leadership style do you like? Which kind of leader are you? Describe a good and a bad leader you have known, worth thinking about. Now, when it comes to decision making, in the West and East, things are very different. In the West, we have problem-solving managers, certainly all the linear actives, and they start at the bottom with problem recognition, information search. They use their senses. They create new alternatives. They make an individual choice. And when the information is taking place, it's usually quite dynamic. So this is the way problem-solving managers tackle decisions. In the East, it's quite different. These are what we call situation-accepting managers. And so they see it at the bottom. You go to there, you see it as a fate or God's will. So the problem is fate. And therefore, there's so much more respect to it, and they don't worry too much about new information, but they use ideas from the past because they have great respect from the past in reactive cultures. Think of the Japanese, the Chinese, and they search for a historical precedent. What did we do in 1990? What did we do in 1980? What did we do, in 1970? We've been doing business all these years. Which were the best decisions we made? Let's look for the best precedent. And the best precedent is the one they will choose. So instead of going forward, they're quite happy to go back as long as they can find, an acceptable precedent to follow. And it's unanimous. And so these are the implementation is unanimous. It tends, however, to be much slower than the Western way of doing things. Strategies also affected by the cultural differences. The strategy of linear active business people is, of course, innovation is very popular, and the bottom line is very important. And they tend to hope that innovation will lead rather quickly to a good bottom line. The multi-active people, they are more concerned with reputation and imagination, and they will offer multiple perspectives, looking also for profit, but trying many things rather than just innovation. The reactive people, as we said earlier, they look at the best past precedents and they'll try to do the same thing. And they are concerned with steady growth, not necessarily very quick, but to increase market share, because the profits will come later. So for Asians, especially Japanese, market share is more important than profit, because profit will come automatically if they have the best market share. Negotiating, how do the different typologies affect negotiating? Well, linear active people, you know, put the cards on the table, the proposal and counter proposal, and then they're looking for a compromise, which leads to a solution. And that's straightforward negotiating. The multi-actives, they of course have a longer background discussion. They present logical proposals, and if it's rejected, they say, you must defeat my logic. So both sides then resort to persuasion. So multi-active people, all the Latins, Africans, and so on, you can have a long period of where each side is trying to persuade the other, and the logical victor takes a lion's share. The reactive people, they like to discuss in a vague way, because in courtesy, excuse me, excuse me, courtesy is very important in a reactive discussion. They make minimal demands, and they make concessions, reciprocal concessions. Final decisions they delay, so that nobody loses face, and in the end, they come to a solution where nobody does in fact lose face. So courtesy is extremely important in negotiating with Asians. Truth and trust, well, both very important factors in business. You know, if we look at truth, for a German or a Finn, the truth is the truth. Die Wahrheit is die Wahrheit for a German. In Japan and Britain, it's all right. The truth is, if it doesn't rock the boat, I'm sorry, if it doesn't rock the boat. In France, it all depends. So very often they say, cela dépend, which means they postpone, you know, the discussion for a while. They're saying everything depends on the situation. In China, they say there is no absolute truth. Nothing is absolutely true all the time. And of course, you can challenge this. There was a student walking with his professor, and he decided he would say something which was true, in spite of the fact that what the Chinese believed. So he saw a cow, and he pointed to the cow, and he said to his professor, "That cow is brown." The professor looked at him and said, "Well, it's brown on this side." And then in Italy, truth is negotiable. What do we mean by negotiable truth? I'll give you an example. I have a friend in Sicily, rather a friend in Venice, who comes from Sicily, and he works for the Bank of Sicily. And I have lunch with him occasionally. And he told me one day, come on Monday for lunch, but come a little early because I have a meeting in the afternoon. So I went to the bank early, and he wasn't quite ready. He was sitting in a room with a bunch of people. But he waved me onto his office, and 5 minutes later he came and we had lunch. And I said to him, "Well, you told me to come early because you had a meeting in the afternoon, but obviously you were in a meeting this morning. Who were the people this morning with all those people around you, 10 people? Oh, he said it was all the bank managers who would come this afternoon. And I said, well, why were you dealing with them in the morning? He said, well, we have a meeting in the morning to decide what we're going to say officially in the meeting in the afternoon. So that is what Italians call negotiable truth. Okay. And here you see our truth depends on, you know, the position in the triangle in the bottom left-hand side. Truth is academic. The temperature today is 24 degrees, etc. Higher up among the French and the Poles, truth is situational, flexible, and truth is negotiable among the Italians and the Africans at the top. And coming down, look at the bottom, near Japan, truth is a dangerous concept. Now, what do we mean by truth is a dangerous concept? I'll give you an example. Let's say 5 engineers are discussing a bridge, the construction of a bridge, and they're all making calculations. 4 of the engineers are Japanese and 1 is German. And the German engineer notices that one of the Japanese in his calculations has made a mistake. So he says quite loud, "Mr. Tanaka, just a moment, I can see there's a mistake. That figure of 261 is in fact not correct. It should be 216. Now, all the Japanese heard that. What has happened? Well, what has happened, if you know Japan, is that Mr. Tanaka, the one who made a mistake, has lost face terribly. And it will be very difficult for him and the German ever to do business again, or even to talk to each other again. So that was a very bad thing to do in Japan. But of course, the German didn't know the Japanese manners. What should he have done? What he should have done was waited till they got outside and take Mr. Tanaka aside quietly and say, "Mr. Tanaka, your figures are different from mine. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe if you look at my figures, I'm making a mistake." And Tanaka looked at his figures and sees, of course, he's in the wrong, and says, "Oh, no, you didn't make a mistake. It's my mistake. Thank you very much for telling me." And you see, no harm has been done, because as the message was delivered in private, he has not lost any face. And that is how you have to do business in Japan all the time. When you're working with Japanese, you've always got to think, how do I stop them losing face? How do I make them look good? There are, of course, high and low trust societies. Japan, Finland, Denmark, and Germany are high trust. USA and Britain used to be, but the low trust societies are China, Korea, France, Italy, Taiwan, and Mexico. And trust, of course, varies very much in the way you create it. How do you create trust in a linear active culture? Well, you should do what you say you will do. Performance. You should be consistent. Use scientific truth. 10 plus 10 makes 20. And use efficient officialdom. In other words, you can trust these offices and banks and so forth. You can't trust them so much in Latin cultures. They don't believe in officialdom very much, but they do create trust by showing compassion to someone and getting close to them and refusing to capitalize on their weaknesses and even showing the other one's own weaknesses. It's a kind of conspiracy where you protect the other person, and they then begin to trust you very much because they see that you're protecting them. And so compassion is the key. In reactive cultures, it's not compassion, it's protecting the other's face. So you must show extreme courtesy. And if you show extreme courtesy and even sacrifice some things and reciprocate any favors or attentions, then they are so happy in this reciprocity. Maybe they're schoolmates or whatever, but they're so happy to be treated so courteously that they will trust you. This person is a very good person. They know how to treat people, and they can be trusted. So you see, trust is gained in a different way in the 3 typologies. Let's look at other factors in business. Employee status. In a linear active culture, the power distance are very low, so that the MD is the boss, and the chairman, of course, has his position, but the equal voices of the other executives are not far below the MD, so they will discuss things openly with the MD. In a multi-active company, the president, the director general, he has a great power distance between himself and the employees. So he makes the decisions, basically, and he decides things. It's not so collective. Of course, reactive cultures are much more collective. The MD and the president respect the middle managers, and they get obedience from the middle managers, who also respect the people at the bottom of the company, who also obey them, so that Confucian ideas rule, and you have a formal company, but a very respected way of doing things. Customer orientation: how do you treat your customers? Linear active people, they find solutions to problems, and of course they try to do that by the quality of their product and good service and delivery. The multi-active people, it's not so much the quality of the product, but it's personal relationships. They have many contacts, and they intertwine professional social activities, and it's through relationships that they maintain the business and keep the customer satisfied. The reactive people, it's not only personal relationships, but it's the long-standing intercompany relationships, Mitsui and Mitsubishi and so forth, and they have an intense customer focus. So, for instance, even accountants will promote sales by mixing with customers and being very friendly with them and so forth. So, three quite different approaches to customer orientation. And then time and space. Well, again, these cultures, these typologies have different ideas about time and space. As you can imagine, in a linear active culture, you try to organize your day according to the tasks, A, B, C, D, E, and F, and you start at 9 o'clock and you finish at 5 p.m. and you go home, all nice and orderly and organized. That doesn't happen in Italy and countries like that, in African countries. They may start anywhere in the program, but they will do some of the things, but they don't necessarily finish them, and they may leave half of them finished and the other half ignored, and sometimes some things will mix the ideas, so that it's not a clear concept of time and an orderly progress that you have with linear active people, and that applies both to multi-active and reactive people. Yeah, different concept of time. And then you come to space. This is also very interesting, the way people differ. Here you see a bus queue. Now this bus queue is in a multi-active country, and you see that people stand close together. It wasn't in the days of COVID, and they are friendly. Their shoulders are touching. They're multi-actives. They're Latins. In fact, this picture was taken in Portugal, and they're very friendly group of people waiting for a bus and in close contact with each other. Now that does not apply to other cultures, and in another country which is partly linear and partly reactive, you see the question of space is treated quite differently. Look how they're all apart. And I've shown this picture to Brazilians in Sao Paulo, and when they saw this picture, they said, "What is that?" And I said, "It's the bus queue." And they said, "Well, no, it's not a bus queue. Where is the bus stop?" I said, "There on the left." "Well, why is the woman then not standing next to the bus queue? Is she first?" I said, "Yes, she's first. But in this country, you consider it polite to, it's a very reactive and partly linear country, and it's nice and orderly to leave a space of 10 meters. Maybe someone comes with a wheelchair or something like that." And they said the other people are not really close together. I don't know, they all like to have about 2 meters space. Well, they said, "There's very strange people, where is this picture taken?" I said, "It's taken in Finland." They said, "Well, all we can say is that the Finns are very strange people." And I said, what do you mean strange?" They said, "Well, the way they queue up, but at least we know they are honest people." And I said, "Well, yes, the Finns are very honest, but how do you know that?" And they said, "Well, in Sao Paulo, if you leave that black bag there, well, it's not there very long." So that is what Brazilians see when you show them this slide. And they said to me, "Mr. Lewis, you're a very nice person, and we think that You told these people to stand like that so you could say the picture. We don't really believe they queue up like that. And I said, oh, but they do. I said, in Finland, that's how they queue up. If I show you another picture where I am not standing near the queue and cannot influence them, will you believe me? And they said, yes. So then I show another picture. I said, look at that. That's another Finnish bus queue in Helsinki even, and that's how they queue up. And after that, they believed me. I showed them one more picture, which is quite different again, where all the bus queue sits down. Well, why do they sit down? Well, because the bus, you're never sure when the bus is going to come. So it's wise to have a seat rather than to stand. Which country is this? Well, it's Cuba. One or two things differ again in three categories. Hi, we just changed computers, so I've a few more minutes to go. Emotion, well, I said.
Just check. So Eleanor, can you still hear us? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, great. Okay, good.
Well, linear active show disagreement directly, as you can imagine. I don't agree. All the Americans would say, you've got to be kidding. I don't share your opinion. Yeah. But multi-actives like to keep things pleasant. Italian, let's go for a comparion, discuss it tomorrow. Or Brazilian, you are the boss. I suppose anything is possible. You got a way of agreeing even when they disagree. And then reactive, similar, have another cup of coffee. It's interesting you should say that. That means I disagree, of course. I agree up to a point. Let's agree to disagree, which is a very nice way of saying things. And then other multi-active euphemisms makes it sound better than it is. You know, losses can be described as negative cash flow, and death in hospital can be described as negative patient outcome. And it has lots of potential, future potential, means it's failed. So, but it sounds better. Okay, coded speech. This is very British, of course. And this on the left, you have what is said, and what is meant is on the right. And you see, an interesting idea. It means it's a stupid idea. And we must have a meeting about your idea. Means forget it. And we shall certainly consider it. Means we won't do it. So these are, I agree up to a point, means I disagree. And one or two other funny ones here. He's our best golfer. That means we keep him out of the office. And it is what the chairman says at the end, the last one, when the chairman says, let me make a suggestion, he's actually saying, this is what I've decided to do. So that's coded speech, which is a subject in itself. And now I show you two more slides, the last ones. And it's a different subject in a sense. It's showing how culture can be misinterpreted sometimes by a simple language question. So once I was in Spain at Madrid airport, and I went to catch my plane, which was gate 16. And when I got to gate 16, it said no regular flights. So that was terrible news for me. You know, I have to stay in Madrid another night. No regular flights. And then, of course, I realized that it was a language mistake. And I went to the manager of the airport and I said, look, what is no regular flights? The flight is going. He said, yes, the flight is going, but it's not regular. I said, well, what you mean is it's a chartered flight. I said, you can't say no regular flights. He said, why not? If a flight is no regular, then you say no regular flights. I said, it's a charter flight, please. And then I went to Barcelona and saw the same mistake, informed the manager, and 3 months later, I went again to Barcelona and to see if they had helped. It had helped at all. And there was the sign, he had changed it. I accepted my advice. Vuelos no regulares, no regular flights, charter. So he did put in my suggestion, charter, but no regular flights remains there, maybe forever. So that's a way that things can be misunderstood through pure language questions rather than cultural. Yeah. Well, that's the end of my presentation today. Have you any questions? Just a few minutes we could answer any questions you may have. Questions, anyone?
Thank you very much, Richard. That was very interesting. I would like to repeat, are there any questions to Richard? Take the opportunity to ask him whatever you want to know.
Well, that means you agree to everything then. That's good news. Thank you very much. If any of you want to write to me, you can, and of course I will be happy to answer any questions. But you should also try to read my book, which is called When Cultures Collide. It sold 1 million copies, and you can get it in almost any bookstore, and it will answer any questions you may have. It's the 4th edition. It's been going for 20 years. So the title is When Cultures Collide. Goodbye, everybody. It's been nice talking to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you very much to all of you for participating in this webinar, and have a nice evening. The webinar will be on our website soon, so you can listen again. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you very much, Eleanor, for your coordination. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah, goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. A very good evening to you all.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
If that's everybody, is it?